And I first came to Rowayton when my parents came here in 1939. When I got married in 1948, the first place we lived was in Rowayton. My mother used to open the real estate section of the New York Times every Sunday, and she'd look through it and she'd say, "Oh, I'd like to buy that house." My folks had found a little house that Dad was able to buy from the bank. He always told me he found 2 nickels to put together. And he found a little house on Rocky Point Road. The road curves around, and this is just before the curve. The house has since been remodeled. But it had been a fishing shack, and so slowly it had changed its character. One of the very important parts of living in Rowayton was the fact that we had so much water, which meant that we had a river that during the summer was full of boats. In the early days, there were huge boats. The whole harbor was filled with 50, 60, 70 footers. When the weather was nice, a few boats went out. Most of the people who had boats in the river used to come up and sit there and drink beer. So I think there were still a lot of beer cans on the floor of the river. Certainly in the beginning, and after that, my parents used to walk around Belle Isle, and they knew everybody. Everybody said hello. Of course, the children spent all day long at the beach, many of them without anybody supervising them. It was a very safe, comfortable place to live.
And I was born in Rowayton, the 29th of October, 1923. We lived on 319 Rowayton Avenue, just the third house on the left above the railroad tracks. During the Depression, we lived on the land. Our job was to dig clams. So we go down to the beach and we go out, feel around with our toes, and we carry a magazine bag over our shoulder, Collier's or Saturday Post, and put the clams in that, dive down, put the clams in. Then when we got the diving masks, you could dive down and see them, so you could get 8 or 10 at once. My best friend lived in a house that was a twin house of ours, but it was right up near the cemetery, and they had a big swamp out back there, and we used to build dams and channel the water around, and then we would play, and there was a big field up behind that house, and then we'd go into the woods and play around in there. We had a wonderful time. I remember we would always have a proclamation for Thanksgiving and Memorial Day, and we'd all walk down out of the school and assemble around the flagpole. For 4th of July and Labor Day, they'd had a big picnic up on what was called Columbus Grove. They'd cook hot dogs and watermelon, and we'd have races on the beach. Somebody in town built me a wonderful rowboat, and I would come down and I could row around, and there's a creek over there that goes in behind Tokeneke Club. And I remember many times going out there, and of course people were learning how to play tennis and missing the back screen. So the tennis balls were all landed out in there, and I'd come home with buckets full of tennis balls. One of the things we used to do for entertainment, when at Christmas time, of course, you always had the Christmas pageant, and we all had our pieces to speak. And you go up and stand in front of the people and say the pieces. When I was in probably the 3rd grade, There was this story about how one of the big boys had been going by the cemetery, the Raymond Cemetery right next to the church, and there was an open grave and there was a casket in there and you could see the person. Of course, you always would run by there sort of scared because that would happen to be another open one. But one day, well, it must have been 60 years later, I was talking to a little girl who had was in the 3rd or 4th grade, and she said to me, you know, one day one of the big boys in 6th grade was going by that cemetery and he saw an open grave. So that story had persisted that entire length of time, which sort of surprised me.
Going to Rowayton School, I had in kindergarten I had Miss Sherman, which I think many generations did. The current school was built in 1939. The school was a fraction in size of what it is today. It was the original school. But some of the anecdotes I have there, I remember distinctly. Air raids, drills, going out in the hall and putting your hands over your head. There was an air raid siren on the roof, and I believe both those sirens are now on top of the fire department. But every Saturday at noon they were tested, and you knew on Saturdays when it was 12 o'clock because the air raid siren would go off.
Trendley's greenhouse had a big loud whistle that they would blow at 7 o'clock to let their people know that it was time to get started and get to work. And so we would always jump up when the 7 o'clock whistle blew, have our breakfast, and then we would run down to leave home about 8:30 and run down to school, and we'd get there 8:45, and we'd have about 15 minutes to play out in the yard. But that was the way we began school. You'd stand up and say the Pledge of Allegiance, and at that time it didn't say under God. The under God didn't come until about 1932.
In the winter time, we skated at the old school pond. For sledding, we went down to the old school lot. Plenty of sledding down there. Summertime, we could be found at the beach, could even be found next door at Weyburn, because Weyburn had a trampoline, and we kids loved to play on their trampoline, and furthermore, we loved sliding down the slide that was out on one of their floats. And I guess the people at Weyburn really didn't mind the little Rowaytonites going over there to their beach.
Back then there were, as I remember, I think there were 5 stores. There was Nardi's, which was right at the on Rowayton Avenue where McKendree Court is, and that was just a very small one. You could go in there, and they had the penny candy that was a big thing then. Then when you went down further, you came to Miss Griffith's store, and Miss Griffiths was the one who would always say, hurry up, what's the matter with you? Hurry up, I don't have all day. And you were scared to go in.
After school, we congregated down at Soybell's Pharmacy. There was a wonderful fountain there. Could get anything you want. Ice cream sodas, milkshakes. We would just always gather there before figuring out what we were going to do for the afternoon. And chances are we did it via walking or bicycling. Our parents didn't drive us any place.
I know now kids' parents do so much for them. They can take them places, and if you get somewhere, they come over and pick your bike up in the station wagon. Back then, you had to get where you were going and get home. You had to figure out your own solutions to whatever problem you got into, because the parents were so preoccupied trying to keep things above water that they didn't have time to sit and play with you. It was, but it built character, I guess.
I'm left with the impression that we were quite satisfied. Rowayton was a busy place.
Growing up here in Rowayton, I felt was a gift.